Welcome to Books in Brief, where we explore the key ideas of great books and how to understand them in everyday life. Today, our mission for this deep dive is a pretty crucial one. We are looking at understanding exactly why we do what we do, and more importantly, how you can actually take back control of your life.
It is a really fascinating topic to sit down and think about. I mean, when you woke up this morning, what did you do first? Did you hop straight into the shower or, did you reach over and check your phone? Did you tie your left shoe or your right shoe first? Most of the choices we make each day feel like the products of well-considered decision-making, but they actually aren't. Research from Duke University found that over 40% of the actions you perform each day are not conscious decisions at all. They're just automatic habits.
Wow, 40%. That brings us to the focus of today's deep dive, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. This book completely changes how you look at your own daily routines. Okay, let's unpack this. Charles Duhigg investigates the incredible medical case of a man named Eugene Pauly. He's often referred to in medical literature simply as EP. So Eugene suffered a catastrophic bout of viral encephalitis, and the virus basically completely destroyed his medial temporal lobe. The damage was so severe that his conscious memory was virtually erased. I mean, he couldn't remember his own age, and he couldn't hold on to a new memory for more than a minute.
Yeah, his condition was incredibly extreme.
Exactly. He would literally cook himself bacon and eggs, eat them, go back to bed, and then 40 minutes later get up and cook bacon and eggs all over again. He couldn't even draw a basic map of his own home to show someone where the kitchen was. Yet, to the absolute shock of his doctors and his wife, Eugene could easily navigate his neighborhood to collect pine cones on a morning walk. And he could effortlessly navigate his house to find a jar of nuts in the kitchen.
What's fascinating here is exactly why Eugene could do this. His conscious memory, the part of the brain that records new information and events, was entirely gone. But the part of his brain responsible for habits was completely untouched by the virus. To really understand how that works, we have to look at some groundbreaking experiments done at MIT. Researchers there were studying rats in a T-shaped maze. They placed a piece of chocolate at one end of the maze and implanted tiny sensors in the rats' skulls to monitor their brain activity.
Right. And the early runs were pretty chaotic, weren't they?
They were. The first few times the rats ran the maze, their brain activity was absolutely massive. They were sniffing every single corner, scratching at the walls, and processing tons of new visual and olfactory information. But as they ran the route over and over, and it became a habit, something incredible happened. Their brain activity drastically decreased. They basically stopped consciously thinking about the maze altogether. They relied entirely on an ancient golf ball-sized neurological structure near the brainstem called the basal ganglia.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, the basal ganglia basically took over the driving once the route was memorized.
That is a great way to put it, yeah. The brain basically converts a sequence of actions into an automatic routine. Neurologists call this process chunking. Think of chunking like writing a computer macro. Instead of pressing 10 different keys to format a document, you program one button and the computer runs the whole sequence automatically. Your brain does the exact same thing to save energy. And this forms the core concept of the book, which is known as the habit loop. It's a simple three-step process. First, there's a cue, which is a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. Second, there's the routine, which is the physical, mental, or emotional behavior itself. And third, there's the reward. The reward helps your brain figure out if this particular loop is worth remembering for the future.
So our brains are constantly looking for ways to save effort by powering down those high-level decision-making centers. What do you think?
It makes a lot of sense from a biological perspective. I mean, if you had to consciously think about every single micro step involved in backing your car out of the driveway, checking the mirrors, applying the brake, turning the wheel, you would be mentally exhausted before you even got to work. The basal ganglia stores those sequences so the rest of the brain can power down and focus on more complex problems.
Which is brilliant until you develop a bad habit that you just can't seem to shake. To understand how to create new, positive habits, let's travel back to the early 1900s. There was this prominent advertising executive named Claude Hopkins who took on a monumental task. He single-handedly convinced America to start brushing their teeth daily with a toothpaste called Pepsodent. Before Hopkins came along, dental hygiene in America was so bad that decaying teeth were literally considered a national security risk for military recruits.
That is such a wild historical detail.
It really is. So Hopkins realized he needed a habit loop. He found a simple, universal cue, which was the naturally occurring film on everyone's teeth. He called it the mucin plaque. Then he defined a clear reward, which was a beautiful, bright smile. He basically told people to run their tongue over their teeth, feel the film, and brush with Pepsodent to get the reward. It worked like absolute magic.
It did work, but Hopkins's formula of a simple cue and reward was actually missing a crucial ingredient, even if he didn't realize it at the time. A neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz discovered this missing piece years later while experimenting with a monkey named Julio. Julio was trained to sit in front of a computer screen. Whenever a specific shape appeared on the screen, that served as the cue. Julio would then pull a lever, which was the routine. As a result of pulling the lever, a drop of blackberry juice would fall onto his lips, serving as a reward. Schultz monitored Julio's brain and noticed something highly unusual. After Julio completely learned the routine, his brain activity spiked the exact moment he saw the shape on the screen, well before the juice actually arrived.
Wait, so the brain activity spiked before he actually tasted the juice? Why would the brain expend that kind of neurological energy before the payoff even happens?
Because the brain was anticipating the juice.
Yeah.
The habit only truly takes hold when the brain begins to anticipate and craves the reward before it arrives. The power of craving is what actually spins the habit loop and makes it permanent. If Julio saw the cue but the juice didn't arrive, his brain monitors showed patterns associated with anger or depression. The craving had become a neurological reality. This is exactly why you might find it so hard to ignore a box of donuts in the office break room. The visual cue of the pink box triggers the craving for the sugar rush, and that intense craving drives the routine of eating the donut, even if you promised yourself you'd stick to a diet.
There's an amazing real-world application of this concept involving the product Febreze. When Procter & Gamble first created Febreze, it was this miracle spray that completely destroyed bad odors on a molecular level. Naturally, they marketed it to people who desperately needed it. They literally gave it to a woman who owned 9 cats, whose house smelled absolutely terrible. But the product launch completely failed. The woman didn't use it because she had become totally desensitized to the smell of her own cats. There was no cue and therefore no craving for a solution. Febreze only became a massive billion-dollar hit when they completely changed the marketing strategy. They added a nice perfume smell to the spray and marketed it as the anticipated reward at the end of a normal cleaning routine.
That pivot changed everything. People started craving that little spray of freshness after making a bed or vacuuming a rug. They took an existing habit and inserted a new reward that people could actually crave. But if we want to talk about breaking bad habits, the approach has to be slightly different than just creating a craving.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You can completely transform your life by attacking bad habits, but you cannot simply delete them from your brain.
That is the golden rule of habit change. You can't extinguish a bad habit, you can only change it. To successfully change a habit, you must keep the old cue, deliver the old reward, but insert a completely new routine right in the middle.
Tony Dungy used this exact golden rule to take over the woeful Tampa Bay Buccaneers and turn them into Super Bowl champions. Instead of giving his players a massive, thick new playbook to memorize, which would just force them to overthink every play he looked at what they were already doing, he used the visual cues they were already looking at on the field, which football players call their keys. But he simplified their routines. He trained them to react automatically to those same old cues without thinking. He kept the cue of the opposing player's stance, kept the reward of making the tackle, but inserted a faster, more efficient routine. It's easy to see how that works on a football field, but you can do the exact same thing in your own living room. If your cue is feeling stressed after work and your routine is pouring a massive glass of wine to get the reward of relaxation, you can keep the cue of walking through the door and keep the reward of decompressing, but change the routine to a 10-minute walk around the block. Same trigger, same payoff, entirely different habit.
That's an important point. It's not about completely reinventing the wheel and fighting your own nature. It's about rewiring the middle of the loop. If we bridge this concept over to Alcoholics Anonymous, we see the exact same behavioral science at work. AA essentially operates as a giant machine for changing habit loops. Step 4 and Step 5 of the program literally force alcoholics to aggressively identify the specific cues that trigger their drinking. Once those cues are identified, AA provides a new routine. Instead of drinking, the routine becomes attending meetings, talking through anxieties with a sponsor, and socializing in a safe environment. This new routine achieves the exact same reward the person was seeking from alcohol, which is usually relief, escape, or a sense of peace.
It replaces the destructive routine with a constructive one. But researchers point out a massive caveat to the golden rule. When life gets incredibly stressful, habit replacement often fails. People fall off the wagon. The habit replacement only becomes durable when it is accompanied by belief. And that belief is almost always fostered in a community or a group setting. That's why Tony Dungy's football team succeeded together, and why the community aspect of AA meetings is so critical. You have to believe that change is possible, and seeing others change makes that belief tangible.
This naturally leads us to the concept of keystone habits. Because not all habits are created equal. Some habits matter significantly more than others because they start a chain reaction that transforms everything else in your life or in an organization.
The ripple effects of a keystone habit are incredible. Take the story of Paul O'Neill, who became the CEO of Alcoa, which was a struggling aluminum manufacturer at the time. When he gave his first speech to Wall Street investors, they were shocked. He didn't talk about profit margins, synergies, or cutting costs. He said his entire focus was on one single keystone habit, which was worker safety. Manufacturing aluminum is incredibly dangerous work. By relentlessly focusing on making sure workers didn't get hurt, he accidentally forced the entire company to restructure how it communicated, how it handled manufacturing processes, and how it evaluated employees. Alcoa became one of the top performers in the Dow Jones Industrial Average because that one keystone habit caused a cascade of excellence across every single department.
We see this exact same cascade in elite sports, too. Consider Michael Phelps and his coach, Bob Bowman. Bowman didn't just focus on swimming endless laps in the pool. He gave Phelps a specific nighttime relaxation script and visualization routines. By establishing these small, perfectly executed habits before bed and right after waking up, Phelps achieved small wins. These small wins built a profound sense of momentum and control that cascaded into his absolute Olympic dominance. But if we're looking for the most important keystone habit of all for the average person, studies overwhelmingly show that it is willpower.
I've always wondered about that. Is willpower really a habit, or is it just a personality trait that you're born with?
Research shows willpower is absolutely a keystone habit. More specifically, it functions like a muscle. Willpower isn't just an innate skill that you either have or you don't. It's a muscle that gets tired as you use it throughout the day. If you spend all morning resisting donuts and dealing with stressful emails, your willpower muscle is exhausted by the evening. But, just like the muscles in your arms, your willpower muscle can actually be strengthened over time by exercising it. A 5-year-old who learns to force himself to chase a soccer ball for 10 minutes builds the self-regulatory strength to eventually sit down and do his homework on time.
Starbucks actually uses this science to institutionalize willpower for its employees. They know that a young barista might have great intentions, but when a customer is screaming at them over a wrong order during the morning rush, their willpower muscle might just fail. So Starbucks turns willpower into an organizational habit using the latte method. Latte stands for listen, acknowledge, take action, thank, and explain. By training employees repeatedly in this specific routine, dealing with an angry customer just becomes an automatic habit loop. The barista doesn't have to expend precious willpower to stay calm. They just execute the pre-programmed loop.
This is essentially the practice of anticipating the moments of failure. There's a profound story about Scottish patients recovering from hip replacement surgeries. This is an incredibly painful recovery process, and getting up to move is agonizing, but completely necessary. The patients who recovered the fastest were the ones who wrote out specific plans in their recovery booklets. They decided ahead of time exactly how they would push through the most painful moments of their rehab, which the researchers called inflection points. Because they planned for the pain, they had a routine ready when the pain hit them. Their willpower became an automatic response.
We've talked a lot about individual habits and organizational habits, but we can also scale this concept up to entire societies. The power of social habits is what drives massive cultural shifts. For instance, the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded not just because of outrage, but because of the specific social habits of the community. It relied on strong friendship ties, weak community ties, and new shared identities that filled the streets with protesters. The massive growth of Rick Warren's Saddleback Church relied on those exact same social habits of small group communities.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leads us to the complex neurology of free will. There is a stark comparison between two very different legal cases regarding habits in the book. First, there's Brian Thomas, who tragically murdered his wife while experiencing a sleepwalking terror. This was an automatic brainstem response that he was completely unaware of and had absolutely no conscious control over. Contrast that with Angie Bachman, a gambling addict who was sued by a casino for massive debts. Both individuals claimed they were acting out of habit and had no control over their actions.
But the courts, and society in general, view those two cases very differently, don't they?
This raises an important question. Are we actually responsible for our habits? The consensus is that Brian Thomas was not responsible because he never knew the sleepwalking pattern existed. However, once you understand that a habit exists and how it works, you have the absolute freedom and the responsibility to change it. Angie Bachman was deeply aware of her gambling habits and the cues that drove them. Once you are aware of your habits, you are no longer a passive victim of them. You have the power to master them.
Which gives you incredible power over your own destiny. So how do you actually do this in your everyday life? The book outlines a very practical four-step framework for changing a habit. Step 1 is to identify the routine. What is the actual behavior you want to change? Let's say you always go buy a chocolate chip cookie at the cafeteria at 3 in the afternoon and you want to stop. The routine is getting up and buying the cookie.
Step 2 is where it requires some investigation. You need to experiment with different rewards to figure out what craving is actually driving that behavior. Are you truly craving a sugar rush? Or are you just craving a break from your desk to socialize? Try eating an apple instead. Try going for a quick walk to chat with a friend without buying anything. If chatting with a friend satisfies the urge, then the craving was never about the cookie. It was about socialization.
Exactly. Once you figure out the reward, you move to step 3, which is isolating the cue. Almost all behavioral cues fall into one of 5 categories. It's usually a specific time of day, a physical location, a certain emotional state, the presence of other people, or an immediately preceding action. You just have to play detective to figure out which of those 5 things triggers your cookie run.
And finally, step 4 is to have a plan. Write down what psychologists call an implementation intention. Once you know the cue, the routine, and the reward, you write out a formula. When the cue happens, you will execute a specific pre-planned routine to get your desired reward. It's about breaking the invisible patterns down into their individual parts so you can actually tinker with the machinery inside your own head. It takes time and it takes experimentation, but meaningful change is entirely possible.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought today. The great psychologist William James wrote extensively about habits, and the brilliant writer David Foster Wallace captured the essence of this perfectly. Wallace once told a story about 2 young fish swimming along together. They happen to pass an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and eventually one looks at the other and asks, "What the hell is water?" Our habits are our water. They are the completely invisible choices and routines we engage in every single day without realizing it. So consider this. What is the water you are swimming in today? What is one seemingly insignificant routine you followed this morning without thinking? And what would happen if you chose to believe you could rewrite it tomorrow?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this brief exploration of the book, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. New book insights are coming soon. See you next time.